All right, guys. Again, for those of you who don't know, my name is John McLaughlin. I think everybody should know, but I am a member emeritus here of the COE. Um, so welcome everybody to the ORD fundamentals training. Let me share my screen. And all right. So again, from the standpoint of approach, it's going to be similar to what we did in the prior two sessions for OSE. And so we'll review the objectives just to make sure we're all on the same page, but very similar to OSE. Again, have a few slides up front to introduce some of the kind of key concepts and terminology, so we're all speaking the same language. And then again, we'll have some iterative demo where I'll try to illustrate the fundamentals of ORD, and then give everybody some time to actually work in their sandbox companies and perform some exercises to get some hands-on experience. Then we'll wrap it up. So again, from an objective standpoint, again, I think similar to OSE, based on the relatively large number of participants, I think we're going to have a varied degrees of exposure to ORD, amongst the participants. Again, the focus here is really to provide everybody with a fundamental knowledge of ORD. So we're going to take the approach that you're starting with little to no exposure to ORD. So again, apologize to some of the folks who have had an opportunity to work with ORD and maybe a little bit more advanced, but that's really the main objective here. So just wanted to be clear on that. And again, one of the key marching orders was to provide the opportunity for some hands-on experience. Actually, we're not configuring solutions, so using ORD. Sorry, guys. And again, similar to what we did with OSE, we want to leave everybody with kind of a functioning internal sandbox company and validation, so that moving forward, you'll have a company where you can actually, just like with OSE, you can work with ORD. So this should be the exact same company. And again, we've enabled both OSE and ORD in your company, so we'll have access to both OSE and ORD in that same validation company. Any questions? Does that seem reasonable?
Seems
All
good.
right. Yeah, from a kind of just an intro standpoint, we hit the slides, so I'll hit it really quickly again. But from a ORD standpoint, when we say ORD, it's OPUS reports and dashboards. That's really the solution name, and that's what we'll be referring to most of the time. But again, if you do hear report builder, that's specific to the application name. And again, the only time we really reference report builder would be when we are kind of enabling the application kind of up front, maybe for a new client, for instance, or if we set up a new sandbox company, we'd refer to that as report builder and have to communicate with ATS with that terminology. ORD, again, how do we access that within our test companies? Again, similar to OSE, reports and dashboards will appear under our main menu. So when we log into our test company, or really any company moving forward, if we go up under our main menu, we should see reports and dashboards, just like we saw OSE displayed here. When we worked with OSE, and when we select that, we'll actually have, just as we saw, with the ensemble experience, we'll have a new tab opened for reports and dashboards. And again, as we get into this, we'll see that the kind of look, feel, behavior is very similar to OSE, and the navigation is going to be very similar also. So again, it's kind of the consistency of the Gen 2 approach, which is great, and it makes it very easy to kind of pick up a new solution. Again, from a kind of the key takeaway from this slide is kind of how ORD is designed and intended to be used, is that, as we see here, we kind of have two different classifications, if you will, of people who will be using, or personas who will be using ORD. Kind of have the concept of, as it's termed here, TraceLink administrators, and then we have users. So again, half step back, think of it as there may be within a client or within a partner even, but maybe a client's a better example where within a client there may be what we're terming here trace like administrators who will have access to the reports and dashboard solution, who will actually be configuring reports and dashboards. For use potentially by themselves or by the broader audience there at the client. And they would actually have the roles that would enable them to access reports and dashboards. Conceptually, we're thinking that there's also another persona here that we're referring to as users who may not necessarily have access to reports and dashboards, the solution, but will still want the capability to execute and interact with reports that have been configured and are in place and dashboards that are configured and in place. So again, just to kind of introduce that, and that we'll have kind of two different personas. One who will actually have access to reports and dashboards will be performing the configuration work, and another persona here that will be kind of using those reports and dashboards. Any questions there? All right. Probably again, if we take anything away from the PowerPoint presentation here, this is probably the key slide, I think, to understanding reports and dashboards and how we actually configure and how it's structured. There's really three key, again, to use the term like objects. These are just different objects, but there's three key objects that are used to actually configure reports and configure dashboards. And the base building block is something that we call a query object. So that's really where this all starts. So before I can actually create and configure a report or a dashboard, I need to establish what we call a query object. And that just, you think of a query object as establishing kind of a view of the object data. So again, for Mint, think of object data as our POs, our invoices, our ASNs, and so on. And what query objects do is kind of create a view over those objects that can then be used to, create and configure our reports and dashboards. And what we'll see is when we create a query object, that query object can establish a view over a single object, such as a PO, or that query object can establish a view over multiple objects. So maybe think of it, for a PO, these examples. So I have information that's on a PO. I have information that's on a PO acknowledgement. Those are related through a PO number normally, right? So I may want to set up a view where I can create a report or a dashboard that pulls information from both the PO and the associated PO acknowledgement. Similar relationship, say, to a forecast plan and a forecast plan response, right? They're related, but they're two separate objects. So I'd have to create a query object that creates a view over those two related objects. Pause there for a sec. Any questions, guys? Okay, but that's really where it all starts. Like I cannot create a report, or a dashboard until I've, created a query object that establishes a view over the data that I'm interested in reporting. Now, again, from a relationship standpoint, once I create, one or more query objects, then I have the capability to create a report. Okay, and a given report is going to be based on, one query object. Okay. Now, again, from a relationship standpoint, the one to N here basically says that once I create a query object, I can use that query object in one-to-many reports. Okay. Now, from the standpoint of similar kind of as this builds, right, a dashboard, I cannot create a dashboard until I've created both a query object and a report. So the dashboards will be built based on reports. And again, similar to the one-to-many relationship between query objects to reports, it's a one-to-many relationship between dashboards and reports. So when I create a dashboard, that dashboard can basically illustrate data based on one report, or I can pull multiple reports onto this dashboard for display. Any questions here, guys? Again, kind of, really key concept here as far as kind of how this is all constructed. And again, it's kind of bottoms up from creating my query object, creating my reports, and then being able to create a dashboard.
Can a report also live on multiple dashboards?
Absolutely great question, Greg. Yep, you can have a single report, and that can be on n different dashboards. Absolutely. Yep. No, great question. Any others, guys? And again, I guess to take a kind of take a half step back there, the same applies. We touched on it, but the same applies for a query object, right? I create one query object to keep it simple, based on purchase order. Again, then I can use that query object on n different reports, right? I don't need to recreate the query object for that purchase order, multiple times, in case I have multiple you know reports based on purchase order.
And John, can these the queries be used for across different users, or is it per user?
No, great question. Yes, no, it can be used across multiple users. Yep. Yep. And again, I think that the concept here, as we'll see when we get in there, but we have a conceptually how these are managed are again very similar to solutions in that we have the concept of different catalogs. If you recall from when we discussed OSE, so we have the concept of a company catalog, and you can have a set of query objects in your company catalog, and then we also have the concept of like a marketplace. So again, if you kind of along that line of questioning, right? If I create a query object in the marketplace, based on external manufacturing PO, yeah, I can copy that down basically to my company catalog, right? And there's really no need necessarily to kind of recreate within my uh, company catalog. Yeah, it's once it's there, it can be used, as you said, for multiple users, multiple reports, and it's a fairly kind of simple construct here is the query object.
So it's the same logic as OSE that in
Yes,
terms of okay.
yes, from a catalog and a catalog management standpoint, yes. Um, yes. Yeah, concept
Thank
of
you.
a marketplace catalog and a company catalog.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, great questions. Any other questions?
I just want to make absolutely clear because this is something that I've gotten questions about in the past. The concepts are the same, but they are two separate catalogs.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, but conceptually kind of within the solution, it's conceptually the same.
But then a company that creates these queries could then, if it's in the public catalog, share it with other companies can then use.
Yes, absolutely.
Same.
Same concept is that being able to, if I create a dashboard and I put a lot of time and effort into it and I like it and I want to share that, I can promote that, if you will, to the marketplace catalog, and then that can be saved as or downloaded depending upon the terminology you want to use by other clients or by other partners even. Yep. No, great questions, guys. Comments? Any other at this point? All right. Again, this kind of goes step by step. Again, query objects, as we said, that's the base building block for our reports and dashboards. Again, in the most simplest form is a query object that's based on one object. So again, if I just, and again, it really kind of starts when you think of, it all starts with like when I design a report, what data do I want to see on that report? And then that really drives kind of what query object definition is required to support that report. So again, if I'm just want to create a report with data from a purchase order, from the purchase order object, then I can create a simple query object that's based on just, what we call it the primary object. So which would be purchase order. But if I design a report and have a requirement for, again, data from both the purchase order object and the PO acknowledgement object, then my query object would be a little bit more complex in that my primary object would be the purchase order. And then as you see here, kind of my secondary object would be the PO acknowledgement. And so you can, when you create a query object, you can have, just a single primary object, or you can have multiple objects, with one being the primary and then the secondary, tertiary, and so on. But it really all starts with defining the requirements for your report, and then kind of, understanding where those columns, if you will, on the report are sourced from. What objects do they live on, if you will, and then having the appropriate query object and the appropriate view over those objects to support that report definition. Any questions there, guys? And again, I think here, what the hope is, right, is that, we'll have a marketplace that contains, many standard query objects for the standard relationship, so that, we don't want to have, for each client we, implement, start from scratch and create all the query objects that are required, right? I don't think there's any need to do that. We should be able to download the standard ones from the marketplace, and use that as a starting point. And likewise, when we talk about reports, hopefully we'll have some standard reports there in the marketplace that at least our clients can, have a starting point from, right? And not have to start from scratch and create some of the standard reports from scratch. Any questions there? But again, I think the key really, oh, go ahead, please.
What would be considered currently as standard reports then?
No, great question. And again, this is where my knowledge might be a little bit dated here by a couple of weeks, but again, to take a step back, like if you think of, as one example, right? If you think of, I want to be able to create a report that reports on my purchase, outstanding purchase orders and every line item on those purchase orders. So that might be something that's really standard, and I might have a similar report for, invoices, right? That's simple. I just want to report on all my outstanding invoices and be able to see the line items on each of those invoices. So if something like that, again, it would be a pretty standard query object where I just have my primary object of either PO or invoice. And so it's a pretty simple relationship. All the data on my reports coming from that primary object. So I could have the standard kind of query object based on, a single object, and then I could have a pretty standard report that just, lists out some of the common columns or fields on the purchase order and at the line level, and make those available. And again, sure, oh, absolutely. Any other questions? All right. Again, from a report standpoint, as we said, it's going to be based on a query object. And again, I think the key is, understanding, to build that relationship, first, understand your requirements. What data do you want to see on your reports? And then kind of back it up and say, okay, where does that data live? What objects does that data live on? And then make sure you have a query object to support your report requirements. Again, similar to OSE, it truly is no code. So again, I think unlike OSE, there really isn't a parallel from the Gen 0, Gen 1 world. So this is new, but again, it's a similar approach from the standpoint of being a purely no code development. So it's analogous to OSE Gen 2 from that standpoint. So that is great. It makes life very simple. Again, what we'll see from a report standpoint is you can define different filters for your reports. Again, some of the key ones, as you can kind of think of, are going to be things like, process network, right? Do we want to have a report built kind of just for a given process network, or give the end user at runtime, if you will, the ability to filter by process network? Also by partners and other key kind of filter criteria. Again, do I want this report defined for just one partner? Do I want it defined so for all partners, and then allow filtering at runtime? And then we can also, implement a filter really pretty much on any field that appears. So in this case, it's a purchase order report, and I'm filtering by due date. So if it's due within the next 3 months here, the next 90 days, that's all that would appear on this report based on how it's constructed. So those are just give you a feel for some of the kind of the capabilities and the filtering capabilities. And as we'll see when we demo, you have an ability here to select basically in a no-code format what columns you want to appear on the report. Let's see. I guess the other thing just to kind of point out here is similar to how we manage solutions in OSE, we have a similar concept as far as the report moving through various states or statuses here. So when you initially create a report, it's in an edit mode, and when it's in edit mode, again, you can continue to change that. But if you want to put that on a menu and make it available to kind of that user persona that we talked about, we'll need to actually release that report. Okay, so again, think of a report as just another object, and that's how kind of it's managed within Gen 2. So it's an object that can be moved through different workflow states, if you will. It's pretty simple here in that we just move it from edit, test, release. But again, just heads up that we need to move it to released to make it available to put on a menu for an end user to use. Thank you, Alok. Good to hear from you, bud. All right, again, from a dashboard standpoint, again, kind of the key thing is that the dashboards are built on reports. So again, it kind of, just as we talked about the relationship of understanding your requirements for what you want to see on your reports driving the query objects that you need. Similarly, understanding the requirements for what you want to see on your dashboard will drive your requirements for reports, and then by extension your query objects. But again, when a dashboard is created, if you think back to OSE, like when we edited a screen and built that screen over on the push panel on the right, we were limited to those fields that were on the object. Similarly, when we build a dashboard, we're limited to drag and drop onto this dashboard just that list of reports that have been released. Okay, so it's similar conceptually in that we build dashboards from reports just like we build screens from the fields that are defined for the object. Okay. And then again, as you see here, when we drag and drop a report onto a dashboard, there's a number of different configuration options, as far as kind of how we see the data displayed, as far as different types of charts, bar charts, pie charts, graphs, so on. And then we also have the capability, as it's not shown here, to actually display a tabular report on our dashboard. So all of that are different options. And again, similarly, kind of from a filtering standpoint, kind of have the concept again of some of the key filters like process network partners and so on. And as we change those filters here, that will apply basically to all of the underlying reports that are displayed here on our dashboard. Any questions there or any other comments to add, guys? All right. Again, here, just kind of, as far as layout, we talked a little bit about filters, but we do have the capability to, off of the dashboard, drill into additional data. Again, as we see here, we have the capability to kind of, if I see a dashboard displayed here, to be able to click view report and open up basically a tabular report for the data that's displayed here. We also have the capability to select on a different element within our dashboard charts. And again, also, basically display a report that's based on the data that's kind of filtered to this component on the dashboard, if you will. So again, kind of key takeaway, you can filter, as we discussed, this entire dashboard and all of the underlying report data. Then you also have the capability to drill in to see additional detail in addition to being able to display a tabular report, from a dashboard component. Any questions there, guys? And again, we talked a little bit about the kind of the key filters. You do have the capability to define additional filters based on that, other than kind of the standards of process network and partner. And again, as we said, those filters will apply kind of to every report displayed on your dashboard. And again, kind of just to wrap up from a slide standpoint. Again, it's really all based on query objects. So we kind of start at the bottom and work our way up. So we'll need to define our query objects. And again, we can have, in a sense, almost an unlimited number of query objects depending upon the requirements. Again, those based on just a single primary object, or those based on multiple objects, a primary, a secondary, tertiary, and so on, depending upon the report requirements. And again, I think to Greg's question, right, if I have a given query object that can be used on, like in this show, one or more reports, but a report's can be based on one and only one query object. Okay. And then likewise, our dashboards are built on our reports, and then a given dashboard can be based on one or more reports. And that's kind of how that's how it's built up. Any questions there, guys? Again, kind of with our second slide, and then this slide, kind of the key conceptually as far as understanding how this is all constructed and architected. All right. All right. Just a couple of things here, kind of from a usage points to be aware of. Basically, in summary, learn from my mistakes, guys. No, they just one heads up is that, like, when we display our list of reports, so in this case, again, this should look similar to kind of what we saw in OSE, in that if I go under reports and select company, so it's just like kind of looking at my company versus my marketplace reports. Again, just like OSE, my first screen is going to be a search page. Okay, as we saw when we were managing solutions or managing pages. Again, in this case, the object that we're managing is just reports. So when this is displayed by default, the filter is just released reports. So again, more than once I've gone in, I've created a report, it's in the edit state. I save it, I come back here and it doesn't display. So don't be alarmed, guys. It may just be your filter here. So make sure if you want to see reports that are in edit state in addition to those in release, that you update your filter. If not, you may see a blank table and wonder where your report in edit state went. So that's one. And then another, again, just to emphasize, if you go to create a dashboard and you don't see any reports, drag and drop onto your dashboard. Again, make sure that your report is in a released state or status. Again, if it's still in an edit status, it's not available to be placed on your dashboard. So again, just kind of a usage tip here. Likewise, if you extend this again, and we'll hopefully, what we'll see here is that, as we said, there's kind of the administrator persona and the user persona. The user persona won't per se have access to reports and dashboard solution, but they will want to run a report or see a dashboard. So to do that, we'll need to put that on their menu and assign it to their role. However, we can't do that again until the report or the dashboard is in a release state. So again, if you've created a report or dashboard, it's in an edit state, it won't be available to configure as a menu item for your user persona. Okay. And again, this note, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but when you construct your main menu on the left side, there's a limitation currently as far as kind of how creative you can get as far as how that menu structure looks. Right now, it's kind of a 2-level, so you can have what's called a submenu, and then you can have your menu items under that. You can't get more creative as far as how you structure that menu at this point. And then the last point is, again, just to remember, especially kind of when you're in a development mode, is currently once you release a report or dashboard, you will not be able to edit that report or dashboard. So, any questions there, guys? Just wanted to share. All right, guys. Again, I'm just using the Sandbox company here. Again, kind of from as we saw right from the slides, but again, if we want to access reports and dashboards, if we go to our main menu, and again, just like we selected OSE, we can select reports and dashboards. And again, for that, administrator persona, they will have access here. Again, from an end user, they most likely will not have access to reports and dashboards to be able to configure, so they would not see that here. But our administrator persona will. So if we select reports and dashboards, we'll have a tab displayed again here for reports and dashboards. And again, how the menu structure is defined here is again kind of from our three kind of key components or building blocks. We have our query objects, our reports, and our dashboards. And again, within each of these, we kind of have the concept of our different catalogs, our company, and our marketplace. Again, from the standpoint of configuring, we'll be working within our company catalog. So if we select here under query objects, since that's really our starting point, again, similar to as we mentioned, similar to OSE and similar to kind of Gen 2 architecture, right? When we select company, we'll come to a search page and we'll have a search page for that given object. So again, query objects are a type of object, reports are a type of object, dashboards are a type of object. So when we select company here, we'll see a list of all the object instances for query objects. Again, one of the nice adds, I think in the last release here is that right here at the top, you'll see what filters are in play. So if we select filter over here to the right, we'll see right now from a state standpoint, we're basically selecting all. So we'll see any query object that's either in an edit or release state. And if we want to change that, we can, or deselect that, we can deselect it from here. So again, that's relatively new and is very helpful and useful. So we'll see a list of all of ours. If we want to create a new query object, we can select new. And again, the mechanics of this are pretty simple and straightforward in that we'll specify a name and a description. And then we'll specify basically the object that our primary object here. And then down here, we can select any secondary or tertiary objects for building this query object. But again, so the mechanics are pretty simple. I think the key again is understanding the requirements, right? What are the requirements for my report? And then that's going to drive how I set up my query object. So again, from a standpoint of naming, again, there's no magic to this as long as it's unique. But if I want, I can set up. And I guess from a best practices standpoint, I guess I recommend kind of having somewhere in here the components of what the application or the solution is. So if we say Mint, kind of what the orchestration is. So external manufacturing. And then basically what the object is. So if I'm interested in, sent purchase order for external manufacturing, something like this kind of makes sense based on my experience, and it allows you to understand based on the name or the description, kind of what this object is, if that makes sense. And again, guys, welcome to any other thoughts here, but I think that makes sense kind of from a best practice standpoint to have these components in your name and description. Again, we need to select our application. So we can select Mint. And once we select that, that will drive basically what objects are available kind of within Mint to select from. So again, it's nice in that you can filter this down. If I could only type. External manufacturing. So what did we say? Sent, and then P, and that narrows it down to either sent purchase order or sent purchase order acknowledgement. I'll select sent purchase order. And that's really all it takes to define kind of a simple query object based on one primary object. Okay. And I could save that. Again, from the standpoint of if I have a more complex requirement and need to define, a view of my data over multiple objects, that's where I select my secondary object here. All right. So again, like if I want to come in here and select, sent, this is kind of where it gets, we just have to find, like, so if I wanted purchase order acknowledgement, I could find purchase order acknowledgement within here and then select that as my secondary object. Okay. But let's keep it simple initially. So I'll create a simple query object based on my sent external manufacturing sent purchase order. Save that. And again, similar to OSE, that's going to bring me back into like the view or the consumer mode, if you will, kind of for my query object. And again, we'll see right now that I'm in an edit state for that query object. So again, if I want to make this query object available to be used on a report, I'd need to move this from edit to release. So again, how I do that is I go back into edit this query object. We'll move that to released and I'll save that. All right. And now if I go back out to, if I select, and kind of similar to what we saw within OSE, right? What's nice is it's consistent behavior. And so it's once you're familiar kind of with the Gen 2 approach in either OSE or ORD, it's pretty intuitive and consistent. So if we go back to query objects and select company, go back to my search page, now we'll see that, I've added basically my external manufacturing sent PO query object here. And again, it's in a release state. So, any questions there, guys? Again, mechanically pretty simple. Now, I guess if we transition from query objects to reports, if I go over to my reports, again, similar to that, when I select that from my company catalog, I see all of my reports that are created. Again, I have the same ability to filter those. And if I want to create a new report, I'll select my new. And again, nothing magical here but again, would recommend I take some typing lessons maybe. External manufacturing sent PO. So again, application, solution, and then orchestration, and then my object. So sent PO. And I think that's a good convention to go with. Again, name, description, and then I'll have the ability here to select from my released query objects. So we see the two that correspond to what I saw on the search page. So let's go with external manufacturing sent PO. And again, I'll normally select, I think, as best practice, latest query object version, unless you have a more complex requirement where you have multiple query object versions and want a report that's specific to a query object version. And then catalog type is company. And we can save that. Then as we saw before, like within OSE and also here, when we create it, we kind of come into the consumer review mode. We're going to be in an edit state. And then from a report standpoint, most of the configuration is done here under this report criteria button. So if we select that, again, kind of at the highest level here, we need to specify kind of what process network this report is applying to. So I think my active one here is this V2 for my OSC training network. Again, everybody in their sandbox company should have, I think the majority of you will just have the one Mint OSC training network. For companies where we had a hiccup as far as the setup, there's a couple of you out there that might have a V2. So we can select that. Again, from a report criteria standpoint, we can select a specific partner or we can select all partners. And then again, this is kind of where we can define, one or more filters for the report. So again, if we want, from a PO standpoint, so if we wanted to be able to come down here and say, based on a given, based on the order date, I just want to see POs that were, within the last 3 months for my order date. I could set up a filter like that if I so choose. So these are kind of your standard filters that really apply, can apply across all of our reports. But again, we don't necessarily we don't have to have any filters, and that would give us basically, in this case, all of my sent POs kind of over time. And then, so that kind of defines the high level filters. And then if we want to start to build our report, that's where we come down here for, selecting our columns. And again, this works pretty well. Again, if I want to build a think about, I'm going to build a report. All of my columns or data is going to be on, pulled from the PO, from my one primary PO object. So if I do something simple and say, well, I probably want like a PO number, that would make sense. So we select, PO. We may want to understand, who sent the PO. So my receiver, who's going to receive the PO, my line item information. So what's my item, my item code value, my item code type, so on. So this is really just kind of how I build the columns. And again, it works pretty well. You can just key in a subset of the field name and it'll give you a list of those fields that meet that. So it's pretty easy just to select the columns that you're interested in. Once you have your list of columns, you can select apply. And again, this will, again, kind of keep you in edit mode, but show you basically how that report is going to look. Okay. Now, if there's additional configuration options, so if we select columns here, we can see basically, what columns we've currently selected. We can kind of drag and drop these if we want to rearrange them as far as the order. We have the ability to group data. So if you think of we're pulling in a PO number and then we're pulling in, line item information on that PO. So again, this report could get fairly lengthy depending upon the number of POs and number of line items on a PO. So to help the display, we may want to group this information, say by PO number, and then be able to drill down and see the line items within that PO. So to do that, we could take this PO and say, let me group by PO number. That way, when this is displayed, we'll see something like this, where I'll have one line for my PO, and then if I want to see those line items, I drill down and see those here. Okay. Again, we'll have visibility to if we have any grouping defined here within columns and then row groups, but we'll also see that displayed up here. And this will tell us basically that we're grouping by PO number. Okay. We also have the capability to, if we go back to, I didn't include that, you can summarize by value. So if I had thrown quantity on here, we could basically drag and drop quantity down here to the sum of the values. And that would give me a kind of a summation of the total quantity of the line items on that PO. Again, that makes sense if my unit of measure is the same for all line items. That may not make sense if I have different units of measures for my line items, for instance. All right. So again, as I said, we can drag and drop our columns and rearrange them. Another thing that's pretty common, just based on my experience building an initial set of the reports for the marketplace, is right here you see kind of by default when you select a column, the column name is going to be the actual field name, but it also has the object name in behind here. Right now is kind of how this works. So if we want to, basically pretty much every report we created, for one reason or the other, either to remove that object and or based on we wanted to tweak the column header. And again, I think when we work with clients, they're going to have their own terminology. So if we want to change that, something common we do is change this column heading. To do that, we select on our 3 dots here, and then we can come down here, and then we can change this. So if we want to delete the kind of the object and the field name from the object, we can do that. And then if we wanted to, change up our description, we could change that up here.
So
And then
John,
again from a, yep. go
sorry,
ahead,
can I
please.
just ask a question about that? So when
Sure.
a client is creating the filter, then and let's say they've got OSC and they've configured their fields, with those filters, then when they're creating them, they're not coming from their configured filter names. They would then have to, I don't know, say they call, I can't think of an example, something
Sure.
else in their PO screen. Then when they create the filter for the reports, then is that coming from our standard solution naming convention, or do they then have to relabel it as you're doing here to match what they have
Yeah,
in
Laura,
their
great question. Yeah, no, I think like if we just were to, again, to back to the OSC, if we were just to change the display name for a field on a screen, that's not going to get pulled over here. This is pulling basically what we have, on the object. And again, I think to your point, I think I'm pretty confident we're going to have to make a similar change here on the report column heading, for instance.
to match what they have.
Yep. Yeah, that we're
Okay.
not going to pick that up out of the configured solution. Uh, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure. Any other questions, guys, on that? And again, just to apply this again, since at least for me, this was one thing that wasn't super intuitive, so just wanted to make sure cover it. So again, you select the 3 dots, get this display, make the change to your column heading, and then for that to apply, you have to select the check mark here. And then as you see now, my column heading on the report is changed to item number. And again, like this receiver, we depending upon how you want to do it, you come in here, you could, we could change this to anything. If you wanted to change it to partner, we could do that also. Again, make sure you check the select here. And so that's basically again how you make changes to the column headings. Again, wanted to point that out since it's a couple step process under here. And I think this is something that we're going to be doing a fair amount of just based on my experience, not only with solutions, but based on building some of the marketplace reports up front. Any questions there, guys, kind of on the basics of how to basically create a report, select the query object, create a simple report by selecting your columns. Again, changing the column headings, being able to group by a certain field, like in this case, the PO number. Those are some of the common things that we're doing. The other thing just to point out here, so we're under columns. If we go to compute columns, again, we have the capability to, let's see if I go back here. Let me just add a couple of things here so this will make sense. So the other, I guess, kind of common things here, if we have an order date and delivery date, again, kind of common fields that we'd want to display. So we've added those 2 dates now in addition. So we still have we're grouping by PO, changed our column headings, have our item information, and then added our order date and delivery date. We wanted to just add that to give you an example here of kind of from a compute columns. We have the ability to basically apply kind of different arithmetic operators to our fields. So again, a simple calculation, if we wanted to see kind of what the difference is between the delivery date and the order date and display that as a column, we can do something like that, pretty simple. So how we do that, again, just to show you how you execute this, excuse me for that. So if we want to do that, we can drag a field. So if I wanted to say, what's the difference between the delivery date, I could say, let me pull the delivery date down here. What do I want to do? I want to subtract the order date from the delivery date and calculate a field. So I say delivery date, my operator is going to be, let's subtract that and subtract the order date from that. And that basically gives me a computed field that we see here, days between, delivery date and order date. Again, I can grab that and drop it anywhere I want. I can, again, change this. Interesting. All right. So again, just wanted to point that out. That's a way in which we can calculate basically a column, have a derived column based on, applying logic basically to other columns on our report. Again, once we have this in place, we can save this. And again, that just drops it back into the view mode or consumer mode for the report. Again, we're currently kind of in an edit status, edit state. So if we wanted to move that to released, we could come here and basically say move that to released. Save that. And again, now that's going to be available for us to put on a dashboard or to put on a menu. But again, we can't go back and edit that now. So to David's question, if we wanted to, we could just recreate it quickly and change it up. Jump to that instead of listening to more of me, which is usually what people will choose. All right, so reports. So we'll come to our company report. So under reports, company, select new. And again, this was kind of report title, just purchase order line items. Again, I again would recommend something like that, or even include that. Again, this was something we learned just going through the process. Try to make it as descriptive as possible. So again, type in our report name, description, our query object. Again, I'm just going to use what I've got, which is external manufacturing sent PO, and that should correspond to what we had within the exercise. I'll select latest query object version to keep it simple. Catalog type by default is going to be company, and that is what we want. So we'll save that. And that's going to bring us kind of into the view mode. And then from, and again, what the exercise is, guys, just to let you know, is that it's a spec. It's an actual spec that we use that we developed when we created the initial kind of marketplace reports. That is excellent. The initial marketplace reports. So it is something that, we actually used. And this is kind of how we documented the requirements for the initial marketplace reports. So, again, parallel to maybe something that we developed from a client, like based on input from a client, here's we documented in the spec, and then we go and build it. So hopefully this created successfully. If I select this, Yeah, now we'll get into the view mode for the report. Again, if we go to report criteria, this is again where we can select our process network, which is going to be our Mint OSC training network or network 2. From a partner standpoint, say all partners. We won't filter it right now, and we'll say select our column. So again, in this case, first is our PO number. And again, we have 2 here. One's going to be at the line item level, and one's going to be at the purchase order header level. That should be the same. I'll select the header. So that's our first column. Next is supplier. Is going to be our title. So if we say supplier, we got that. And then under our column is the receiver business name. So the actual one they want to select is this receiver business name. And again, that's going to be based on that second column in the spec, which gives us the actual field name. Next one is our line item. So if I select line, this is going to be our line item number, which is what we want. Next guy is item name. So again, the field name is supposed to be product name, but that's not syncing. So if we type in item, again, this is going to be our dot product name here is our item. And then our item code value and our item code type is our next field. We're going to want our quantity as our next field. And again, it works pretty well. It's being able to find the fields either based on the descriptive name or based on the actual field name. Unit of measure. Select that guy. Delivery date. Order date. And then we'll have to calculate the last guy, the days between order and delivery. Again, based on the spec, we're saying we want to filter by the purchase order date within the past 30 days, which is kind of under that use case 1 at the bottom of the spec. So if we come up to filter, and again, this is, again, something we've talked about. This is just, we'll have to find basically in here the purchase order date. And we don't have a type ahead on this right now. We'll select our order. So you can hover over and that'll tell you basically down here, right below there is purchase order date. And then it wants us within the past 30 days. So we wanted to filter here and say within the last 1 month. So that's going to give our order date, all of my POs and their associated line items where the order date's within the last, month. Okay. Again, filtering on supplier, XXX, that was basically just if you wanted to, you could filter basically on the supplier. If not, it's going to give you all suppliers. Okay. So if we apply this, that will bring us here. Again, we won't go through each one, but from the standpoint of if we look at the spec, we have PO number is one column that's here. Again, like we said, to clean this up, we'd go into each column and, clean up our title. Again, in this case, the next column is supplier versus receiver. So we'd want to come in here and follow the spec and just say supplier. So again, won't take the time to go through each of these, but again, that's kind of how we can, change the column headings. Again, if we go back to the spec under the columns for PO number, it said to group by the PO number. So again, we can do that by, right from here, we can grab our PO, drag it up here, and then that way we're going to group by the PO number just to make the display a little bit easier and cleaner, and give us the capability to drill down to see the item information. And so I think And then, oh, the last one, again, the last column there, that days between order and delivery date, that takes us back here to the compute columns field. So if we select compute columns, we take basically our delivery date, minus our order date. So that creates this, and then we can drag this down. We want that to be our last column. All right, so we got delivery date, order date, days between. So again, to change this, they want the title to be days between order and delivery date. We can select this. Ooh, yeah. And it's not allowing us to change that. I'll take a look at that, guys. We should have the capability to change that column heading. So again, that's kind of the quick and dirty on kind of the refresh on, review on that. Any questions, guys, based on, a helpful resource? Real quick from just to show you from the last step in the journey here was dashboards. I just want to show you real quickly with, I know we're up against it with time here. But at least to kind of show you how this works. Again, hopefully it will, from how it looks and feels, will be very similar to what we saw within OSE when we configured a screen, which is the great thing. So if we go back again, back under reports and dashboards, under dashboards for company, select new. Again, just a unique name here. Description, catalog type's going to be company. We save that. And again, this is the quick and dirty. But again, as you see here, just like when we're editing a page within OSE, we have the concept of sections. So again, I just can't, drag and drop reports and charts anywhere I want. It always has to be within a section. So if I select this section, again, we'll see this should hopefully will look familiar from OSE, drag and drop field. So again, the reports, again, we said we can't, to create a dashboard, it's always based on a report. So think of a report to a dashboard similar to a field to a page. They're kind of similar conceptually. So if we select that, then all that's available to put on this dashboard is my list of reports that are in a release state. Again, if it's in an edit state, they won't appear here. It's only those that are in a release state. And again, similar to OSE, when we configure a page, all we do is we drag and drop our report. And again, by default, that's going to appear as a tabular or, a report with columns. Again, we can add different sections. If I select the out here, I can add a section just like I could on my pages. Add a section type. I can apply that. Again, I can select that section, and just like a page, I can configure that to be a 1 column or 2 column, to be on default expanded or collapsed. So again, the nice thing is it's, very similar to how we managed our pages. So if we select this and, again, drag and drop, I can grab this report, drop it here. This guy, and drop it over here with any luck. And then again, what we don't have time to get into a great level of detail on is, again, for each of these, you can, on a dashboard, you can leave the display just like this. So it will be a columnar report. And then you can also, here within reports and dashboards, this is where you can configure it, basically to be, where's my little, right here, to basically be any type of chart. So if we select this guy, select our 3 dots here, and then say edit chart, this is where we get into the details of, specifying different, displays basically for our report data. So again, that's reports and dashboards in 3.5 minutes, guys. So just wanted to at least introduce that. And again, show you that from a configuration standpoint, very similar to OSE and page configuration. Similar concepts, kind of similar user experience.